And we're back, this time with Liquid Entertainment's action RPG, Rise of the Argonauts. To find out more about how you will be classically kicking ass, we'll start our interview. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, we run the full gamut of cultural pursuits here at IGN, from whatever that just was to classical mythology. Sure. Why don't you start us off, tell us a little bit about the game.
I'll tell you what that was.
I don't think I even want to know.
Rise of the Argonauts is a retelling of the story of Jason and the Argonauts from Greek mythology. In many ways, what we've tried to do with Rise of the Argonauts is create what we're sort of calling a true action RPG. You know, a lot of action RPGs really end up falling on one side of the fence or the other. We've really gone out of our way to deliver on both halves of that promise. So as you'll see, all the combat in the game is in real time. It's extremely lethal to really make the player feel epic and heroic within that setting. But we've also invested a lot of energy in bringing that world of Greek mythology to life. I know in many ways it's sort of like the ultimate fantasy setting. You know, everyone's already familiar with the characters and the stories and the gods, and so it's an opportunity for us to go through and take the player into that world and give them a chance to experience what it's like to fight alongside Hercules and what it's like to live within a world where the gods are watching every single action that you perform, while at the same time giving the player lots of opportunities for meaningful choices that impact the story as well as impact how you progress throughout the game.
Great. Can we take a look at it?
Yeah, sure. By all means, let's jump in. So, quick story summary. You play as Jason, king of Iolcus, and at the very beginning of the game, Jason's in the middle of his wedding ceremony, and his wife is assassinated. So the first 15 minutes of the game are you basically hunting down this assassin throughout your palace, killing Ionians that he brought along with him. Ultimately, you exact your revenge. You take your wife back to the temple where you're getting married. He ends up bricking it up, turning into this mausoleum. He's in there for days, mourning her death. Ultimately, he emerges and decides he's going to set off and search for the Golden Fleece, which even in mythological Greece is this artifact that no one even really believes exists. But it's the only thing that might be able to go through and bring her back. In doing so, he sets out aboard the Argo, his ship, and gathers to him sort of this all-star cast of characters from Greek mythology, guys like Hercules and Achilles and Pan and Atalanta and Daedalus and Perseus. So if you're a fan of Greek mythology, you know, there'll be a lot of references to those types of characters. And if not, we'll go through and we'll introduce them to you. So where we're looking at today is we're actually on the island of Iolcus. This is one of the first islands in the game. And Jason's heard rumor that Medea, one of the Black Tongues, has been seen near the Crypt of Kings, which is sort of the tomb of Jason's forefathers. And so with Hercules at his side, he goes to investigate to figure out what's going on.
The great Medea, how far the mighty have fallen. Your power has grown feeble.
Has it?
Now, was Medea a witch, or was she the one that turned into Medusa?
No, Medea was a witch. She was the sort of the temptress, sorceress throughout the story of Jason.
So there's Medea and there's Circe. Do you have Circe in here as well?
We don't have Circe in the game.
Because Circe was
on the Odyssey,
right?
Yeah, exactly. With Ulysses. Nice.
Gotcha.
Well done.
So you're using the characters, but you're telling your own story. I
Exactly.
mean, Medea, Jason, Hercules, they may not have come together in any sort of classical myth in the way you're presenting, but...
Yeah, we have our own unique interpretation of these characters, but they're all staying true to sort of the theme of what these characters are all about. And we'll show that with some of the Argonauts as we go throughout the game. And what we're about to see is combat. Now, combat in Rise of the Argonauts all takes place in real time, as you'll see. There's no need to open up a menu in order to change weapons or to cast special abilities or whatever it may be. All this happens on the fly. You notice that Jason's a weapon master. He's got his sword, his mace, and his spear. They're all on his body at all times. So when he's going through and changing his weapons, you can actually see him swap that stuff out. He's obviously extremely lethal as well. One of the other cool things we have is Jason's fighting alongside Hercules here. You saw him ripping a guy in half beforehand. But one of the cool things about Herc is you don't need to go through and open up a menu in order to go through and give Hercules commands. If you fight side by side with Hercules, his AI will actually change. You'll start picking up guys to set up for combo moves and things like that with Jason. So a lot of it is seamless. We want to minimize the HUD and give the player a really immersive experience.
Well, yes. I mean, speaking of that, we don't see any interface on this game at all. How are you communicating information to players about how things are going?
The main theme that we've had throughout this entire game is we want to communicate all that data in the world rather than on the world. And so as a result, you notice that we don't have, as you said, there's no HUD for Jason's health. All of Jason's health is represented on his body. You know, as he takes wounds and everything else, you'll see him become more cut up. He'll leave bloody footprints. Ultimately, when Jason gets really low in health, you'll see this sort of haze that comes over the edge of the screen. That's called state of grace. And if Jason can avoid getting hit for a couple of seconds, his health will naturally regenerate. So you don't have, you know, health potions or cure light wounds or any of those things. It all keeps the player immersed within the game as a whole. And the same thing applies to enemies.
Now let's talk about the conversation system here. That's pretty interesting. You guys have a system whereby the player can determine how their character grows based on what they say to other people in the game.
Yeah, exactly. As I mentioned before, the gods are watching you at all times. So one of the really cool things about dialogue in Rise of the Argonauts is that every single choice that you're going to be making in dialogue is actually going to be helping to level your character. So, for example, Jason has 4 patron deities that are basically watching over him at all times throughout the game. We have Ares, the god of war. We've got Hermes, the god of mischief and trickery, and we've got I've completely, yeah, wow. We've got Athena, the goddess of justice, and we've got Apollo, the god of protection and light. And so based on each of these individual gods, every single choice that Jason makes is actually aligned with the ethos of that god. So for example, an Ares choice will be aggressive and confrontational. And so not only will that choice have an impact on how that dialogue plays out, because Ares is seeing you be Ares-like in the middle of that conversation, your favor with Ares will go up. And as a result, each god kind of represents a class or a skill tree. So by making these dialogue choices, you're actually going to be leveling up your character over the course of the game.
So let's say as you're leveling up, you reach a certain point of favoritism with any of the gods. Do you then have some sort of interaction or some sort of like reward from that god? And are these gods like strictly NPCs, or what's the situation there?
There's a lot of different ways in which your favor with the gods ends up manifesting. Some gods actually manifest directly, other gods manifest more indirectly throughout the game. But you know, that more ties in with the individual events. But based on your favor with the gods, that'll actually dictate how different characters respond to you and how different events will play out throughout the game.
And so what are some of the stages, since we're not following exactly how the myth follows through? I mean, do you have like Olympus and things of that nature to visit? Or?
We have a bunch of places that are actually drawn from real places in Greece and in Greek mythology. So Jason starts off in Iolcus, just like he did in the story of Jason and the Argonauts. He'll travel to Delphi, where he'll receive a prophecy from the oracle before he sets off on his quest. And at that point, the world really opens up. You can go to Kithra, you can go to Mycenae, you can go to Sare. All of these are actual places that we've drawn from. We've obviously reinterpreted them, but they all represent something different. Mycenae is sort of more of an urban island, sort of this multicultural center of ancient Greece, of the ancient world, really. Sare is more of a jungle type island, and then Kithra is kind of the haunted island, if you will. It used to be this abandoned, it's sort of an abandoned monastery to Athena. She cast down her judgment upon it due to what ended up happening with her high priestess Medusa. So
by saying that, you then also run into other mythology along the way. So like you might go to, I can't remember where it was, maybe Crete or something, and you find you know, the labyrinth or whatever.
Well, actually, what's interesting, you mentioned Crete. On Mycenae, you can travel to Mycenae, and you'll end up interacting with Achilles. You end up fighting him in the arena. Jason has to go through and prove himself, basically before his father-in-law, King Lycomedes, in the arena itself. And he'll end up going toe-to-toe with Achilles, but ultimately, Achilles will end up joining Jason on his journey. But one of the other characters he ends up meeting there is called Daedalus. And Daedalus is obviously the sort of the great inventor, the engineer of ancient Greece. Yeah, exactly, the creator of the labyrinth. And this is after those events took place. He's already escaped. He already went with Icarus. Icarus has already fallen. He's already died. And so when you encounter Daedalus, you actually help smuggle him out of Mycenae, because the agents of King Minos, the agents of Crete, are sort of bearing down on him. And so he ends up, you know, basically hiding away on your ship. But in doing so, he ends up sort of creating his own forge there. And as a result, he's able to go through and upgrade your equipment and things along those lines as you go. So there's a lot of interesting characters like that you mentioned that you'll be running into along the way.
Let's talk about this sequence a little bit. I'm noticing in the combat there's really a really good sense of collision and animation, things like that. How are the players fighting? What sort of effects are they having on the enemies?
What we've done, the key with combat Rise of the Argonauts is we wanted to capture sort of a really cinematic feel.
Right.
I mean, games are the only medium where you can go through and stab a guy in the chest 10 times and they keep coming at you as though nothing ever happened. So every time you go through and you hit someone in Rise of the Argonauts, you're going to go through and either cripple them, wound them, or kill them brutally. And so in order to offset that, the way in which enemies can go through and Jason can mitigate damage is with shields. Now, you'll notice if he goes through and Jason holds his shield out, there's actually live collision on that shield at all times. So in most action games where you go through and you hold down block, you know, your character goes into a blocking pose and then there's just an invisible bubble where stuff deflects off of him. Jason will actually move his shield to actively intercept each of those individual attacks, and those attacks will always deflect off. It's the sort of things that if you've never played a game before and you hadn't learned over the years and everything else that, you know, if I'm not holding down block, if he hits my shield, it doesn't matter, blood's going to squirt out and I'm going to take damage.
Yeah.
It's the sort of rules that you expect. It's the things you've seen in film. It's the things you've seen in every other medium. So we're really trying to raise the bar and make combat feel a lot more cinematic by following the rules of the real world.
I'm noticing that the weapons seem kind of indiscriminate in their damage too. They'll hit friend and foe alike. The Minotaur there was knocking down some of the guys.
Yeah, exactly. We want those rules to be consistent at all times. So that Minotaur will be swinging his blade around at all times, and if he happens to hit, you know, one of his allies, it doesn't matter. That guy's, he got hit with a weapon, he's going to take damage. He's going to get cut in half or fall, you know, have some other kind of brutal death, basically. Right. And the same thing applies to their shields. Enemies use shields in order to go through and help protect themselves, which means that it's interesting. Spatial positioning becomes a lot more important. So when that Minotaur has a shield up in front of him, now you want to try and find a way to flank him, to get around behind him where he's going to be more vulnerable. So a lot of these things are just implicit. People don't need to be told them. They just discover them along the way. The shield's getting in my way. I got to find a way around it. And so they end up discovering all those tactics as they play.
Well, let's talk about the Argonauts' namesake, the Argo. How does that play a role in the game?
Well, the Argo is Jason's ship. It was constructed in his honor, and obviously, as you said, it's sort of the origin of the term Argonauts. One of the things we really wanted to do was to make sure it wasn't just a glorified travel map screen, which is what you get in a lot of games. And so as a result, the ship actually has a number of events that will play on, that that take place on the ship as you travel from island to island, but also the ship will grow and change as Jason goes through and gathers these Argonauts to his side. We mentioned before with Daedalus, when you go through and you acquire Daedalus, he actually moves in on board the ship and he'll go through and set up his forge. There are other Argonauts that have separate roles like that as you're going throughout the game. One of the other really cool things that we have on the ship is the equipment room. Rather than sort of having a crate that you open and it pops open a UI screen, we've gone through and we've listed out all of the individual pieces of equipment that Jason gets throughout the game. They're shown sort of in this trophy room, basically. So you can see all the cool things that you've acquired throughout the game. And one of the big things with equipment is we want to make sure that each piece of equipment has a story, that it has meaning. I mean, this isn't a game where you're going to be going through and, you know, pulling a +1 sword out of the guts of a wolf. You know, these are weapons that are going to be bestowed upon you by the gods, or you're going to acquire due to some really cool event that the player's been involved in. So there's a real sense of significance as you're going throughout the game.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have today, which I actually could talk about this forever because I am a huge fan of Greek and Roman mythology, so I will be picking this up. Thank you so much. It looks great. And guys, we will be back with more in just a little bit.